When the HOA bribed a local cop to seize the land, they thought the threat of a badge would end the fight. But what the HOA didn't know. The landowner's father is chief of police. Now the forged documents, the midnight envelope, and that secret payoff are all part of the evidence that's about to bury them in court. This wasn't just corruption. This was a rigged game, and they picked the wrong family. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The first morning in his new home started just as he imagined. The smell of fresh paint still clung to the air. A light breeze stirred the trees out front. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower buzzed like a contented bee. Birds chattered on power lines like they'd approved of his decision to move here. Finally, it wasn't much to look at yet. The porch sagged a little, the fence needed sanding, and the paint had that tired, sun-bleached look. But to him it was perfect. He'd bought the place with his own savings after years working as a structural engineer on public infrastructure projects. He didn't need luxury, just something solid. He bent down to pull weeds from a flower bed when he spotted the envelope. Thick, cream-colored. The kind that said, "This isn't friendly." Stamped in red across the front. Certified HOA notice, urgent compliance required. He opened it on the steps, already frowning. It was a wall of text, written in cold bureaucratic prose. It cited zoning infractions he'd never even heard of. Grass over 4 inches. Non-standard exterior fixtures. Driveway surface deterioration. He looked around. The grass hadn't grown past his ankle. The driveway was cracked, sure, but half the street looked worse. A line at the bottom was underlined. Failure to comply may result in fines, legal action, or enforced sale under Article 12. He read it twice. Enforced sale? His hands didn't shake, but his chest tightened. Something was off. That evening, just as the sun kissed the tops of the pines, there was a knock at the door. He opened it to find a woman in her early 50s standing with perfect posture, clipboard in hand. She wore pearl earrings, a smile too smooth, and a navy blue blouse that seemed chosen for authority. "Mr. Hale?" she asked sweetly. He nodded. "I'm Linda Caraway, president of the Willow Heights HOA. I just wanted to personally welcome you to the community." She extended a hand. He shook it. Her eyes flicked over his shoulder to the house. "Charming fixer-upper. You have plans for it, I'm sure." "I do," he said evenly. "Little by little, I like doing the work myself." "Of course." She clicked her pen and made a note. "Well, as you may have seen, there are some compliance concerns. Nothing personal, of course. Just a matter of maintaining property standards." He lifted the envelope. "I saw. None of that seems accurate." She gave a light, dismissive laugh. "The guidelines are thorough, sometimes a little rigid." Then her tone shifted. "I wanted to offer a simpler path. The HOA has been interested in acquiring this parcel for a while. It's centrally located, fits into a broader vision for the neighborhood." He didn't answer. She leaned in slightly. "We'd be willing to make a competitive offer, above assessed value, even. That way, you could start fresh somewhere with fewer obligations." He looked her straight in the eye. "No, thank you. I bought this place to build something. I'm staying." For the first time, her smile slipped. Just for half a second. "Well," she said, standing taller, "that's your right. I do hope you'll reconsider before things get overly complicated." She turned and walked back down the path, without waiting for a response. That night, he got a call from his father. "You keeping your head low?" his dad asked, voice gravelly with half a lifetime of law enforcement behind it. He looked out at the dark street, where the HOA president's taillights had vanished hours ago. "I'm trying," he said quietly. "I really am." He didn't mention the envelope. Not yet. But the gears were already turning. It started 4 days after Linda's visit. He was scraping paint off a window frame when the sound of tires crunching gravel caught his ear. A patrol cruiser rolled up to the curb. Not speeding, not lights on. Just casual, like it belonged there. The officer stepped out slowly, hands on his belt, sunglasses reflecting the late morning sun. The kind of walk that said, "I'm not in a rush, but you should be worried." "Morning," the officer called. The protagonist set his scraper down, brushing flakes off his jeans. "Can I help you?" The officer reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a folded sheet. Officer Troy Becker, Code Enforcement Liaison. You've been flagged for a violation under Municipal Ordinance 42B. Setback encroachment. Setback? Hale asked, stepping closer. Your fence is too close to the sidewalk. 4 inches inside the easement line. It's the same fence that was here when I bought the place, Hale said, tone neutral. Becker shrugged. Doesn't mean it's compliant. These things get flagged during zoning reevaluations. Just bad timing, I guess. There was no ticket, just a warning. But the next day, a notice arrived in the mail, $150 fine. Then another, unregistered exterior storage container. Then environmental non-compliance due to surface water runoff. 200. In 5 days, the total hit $1,040. He wasn't panicking yet. But the math was off. The citations were moving too fast, no review periods, no photos attached, and he knew how cities worked. He drafted permits, worked on subdivision maps, read the code. This wasn't normal procedure, it was deliberate acceleration. He started keeping a log. Every envelope, every visit, every timestamp. Becker came by again the following week, this time without his sunglasses. Cities reviewing a possible eminent domain option, he said flatly. They're considering redevelopment in this sector. You might want to think about cooperating early. Hell didn't flinch. Eminent domain requires public utility justification and a full council review. Becker smiled. Things move fast when the city's got plans. And just like that, the cruiser pulled away. That night, he sat at his kitchen table, the windows open, crickets humming outside, and scrolled through city council records. No motions, no pending development proposals, no filed intent letters. He rubbed his temples. This wasn't the city. This was local. Small-time pressure masked as official action. He went to the hardware store the next morning and bought 2 wireless cameras and a motion-activated mic recorder. Installed one on the eave above his porch, another facing the street. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't even label the cameras in the app. But the next day, he watched from his workbench as Becker drove past twice, slowly, this second time rolling down his window to glance up toward the porch. By the end of the week, a city-stamped envelope arrived, except the return address wasn't city planning. It was a P.O. box in town. Inside was a notice of intent to seize under public ordinance. The wording was off. It was too vague, too fast-tracked, and lacked the required appendices. The seal looked real, but the watermark was faint. He ran his fingers along the edges. Someone had doctored the form. Not a rookie job, but not professional either. They were banking on intimidation, not legality. He took a photo and logged it. Then he reviewed his porch camera footage. Timestamped 2:14 a.m. A shadow. A glint of metal. Someone slid the envelope into the door slot. It wasn't the mailman, it was Officer Becker, in plain clothes. Hale's stomach sank, not from fear but from certainty. This was a coordinated effort. Linda was pulling strings, and Becker was the blunt instrument. That night he got a voicemail from an unknown number. Female voice. Soft, syrupy. "We don't want this to get messy, Mr. Hale. Just sell. You'll sleep better." He stared at the phone a long time before deleting it. Then, for the first time, he opened a drawer he hadn't touched since moving in. Inside was a worn leather folder. He didn't open it, just traced the initials burned into the corner. Roy H. His father's. His phone buzzed. A text from his dad. No context. Just, "Still keeping your head down?" He didn't reply. He set the cameras to record on motion and audio. Backed up the footage to cloud storage under a name no one would suspect. He knew now. This wasn't about grass height or fences. This was about control, and someone had made the mistake of thinking he had none. The footage was routine by now. Every night, he'd plug in his phone, pour himself a glass of water, and scroll through the day's security logs. Most clips were forgettable. Passing cars, the occasional neighborhood cat triggering motion, Becker's cruiser creeping past like a shark circling the reef. But this night was different. It was just past 1:00 a.m. when the porch camera registered movement. Nothing unusual until he noticed a second set of footage, triggered behind the property where he'd mounted a third, barely visible camera aimed at the alley that backed onto the HOA's side entrance. He tapped the file. The screen flickered, then resolved into grainy black and white. 2 silhouettes, One tall, stiff-shouldered, the other shorter but angular. Familiar. He paused, rewound, enhanced the contrast. Linda Caraway stood just behind the HOA's rear lot, looking over her shoulder. She held a manila envelope and passed it to the man beside her. Officer Becker. No uniform tonight. Hoodie. Ball cap pulled low. The audio was faint, mostly crickets and wind, but one line came through, clear enough to ice his blood. Make sure he's out before the city reviews zoning changes. A pause. I want it cleared before the vote. If he sells quietly, fine. If not, accelerate it. He sat there, perfectly still. It wasn't about setbacks. It wasn't about fences or environmental runoff. It was a coordinated land grab, and he was standing on the last piece they needed. He leaned back in the chair, eyes never leaving the screen. There were dozens of ways to react. Panic, rage, confrontation. But he didn't move. Not yet. Instead, he backed up the footage to 3 separate cloud drives. One under his name. One under an anonymous shell account. And one saved onto a USB he slipped into a hollowed-out book on his shelf. He wasn't just documenting anymore. He was preparing. Internal affairs? No. He didn't trust that process. Too many ways for it to stall. Two-tone handshakes behind closed doors. He hadn't even told his neighbors what was happening, let alone the city. And he hadn't told them who his father was, either. He pulled out his phone and hovered over his dad's number. Chief Randall Hale wasn't just a parent. He was the chief of police for a neighboring district, one with jurisdiction overlap through regional code enforcement. He'd kept that fact to himself for a reason. He didn't want to look like someone leaning on legacy. But this wasn't about pride anymore. This was about leverage. Still, he didn't press call. Instead, he made a choice. He'd get more. If this was organized corruption, there'd be another meeting. A follow-up. Something about the next Mets. And this time, he'd be ready. He repurposed one of his old drafting drones, used for surveying project sites. Quiet long range, with a thermal lens and a directional mic he'd modified himself. The kind of thing that could sit on a rooftop and watch without being seen. He set the trap. 2 nights later, movement. The drone caught Linda and Becker again, this time inside the HOA's front side lot. Same envelope, different conversation. He's stalling, probably lawyering up. Then push the fines. Stack violations. Trash bin placement, noise complaints, whatever you can find. Linda took a long drag from a cigarette. If he gets to the council, we're red. We need this lockdown before the quarterly meeting. Becker muttered something. Then, relax. He's just some stubborn DIY guy. We've broken tougher. The protagonist watched the exchange from his laptop screen. The drone perched quietly across the street. Lens zoomed in just enough to read lips when the audio dropped. He didn't react, just saved the file, clipped the transcript, labeled it Linda Becker, secondary meet, confirmed conspiracy. Then he sat back and smiled. Just a little. Not smug, not triumphant. Just focused. The seeds of justice were planted. And the roots were starting to grow. The protagonist didn't flinch. He took the clipboard, read through the paperwork carefully. Line by line, he didn't ask questions. Didn't argue. Just noted the sloppiness in the document. Missing attachments. No court scheduling stamp. No third-party confirmation. Still a bluff, but an aggressive one. He signed the bottom with steady handwriting and handed it back. Thanks. Becker raised an eyebrow. That's it? No lecture about due process? Nope, he said calmly. Just following instructions. As Becker turned to leave, he added, be careful out there. Lot of potholes on Hillard. City's slow fixing them. Becker gave a smirk, then disappeared down the path. The door closed behind him with a soft click. The protagonist walked to the kitchen, pulled out his phone, and sat at the table. Same one where he'd watched the footage, where he'd weighed every move like chess. He scrolled through contacts and stopped at the name he'd never called from this house before. Dad. He tapped call. The line picked up on the second ring. Randall Hale. Hey, the protagonist said quietly. You still have jurisdiction over Precinct 1. There was a pause. A shift in tone. Subtle but immediate. What's going on? He didn't rush the answer. He told his father everything. No embellishment, no drama. just the facts. The notices, the camera footage, the bribe in the alley, the falsified seizure papers, served today. For a while his father said nothing. Then came a slow, deliberate exhale. You've been sitting on this how long? Long enough to be sure. Another pause. You have copies? 3 backups, 1 off-site. Do not engage. I'll call you back in an hour. The line went dead. He set the phone down and leaned back, eyes drifting to the living room wall. There, behind an unfinished shelf, hung a photo he'd put up that morning. Him 10 years old, standing next to his dad at a police academy graduation. The old man in full dress blues, proud, stoic, eyes sharp, even back then. People always assumed he'd grown up entitled. But he never mentioned his father's rank. Not in college, not at work, not when he bought this house. The name Hale carried weight. Too much weight. He didn't want shortcuts. He wanted to earn something on his own. But sometimes, power wasn't about force. It was about timing. And now it was time. Outside, Becker's cruiser took one last slow roll past the house before disappearing around the bend. The protagonist didn't watch it go. He walked back to his laptop, opened the surveillance folder, and began organizing every file, timestamped, cross-referenced, backed up again. No more waiting. The trap wasn't just set. It was already closing. The HOA board met at 9 a.m. sharp. The blinds were drawn. The parking lot was empty, except for a few Lexus SUVs and one aging town car with faded bumper stickers about neighborhood values. Inside, the air was thick with perfume and coffee. Linda Carraway sat at the head of the oval table, a half-empty bottle of sparkling water in front of her. Notes neatly stacked beside a ceramic mug that read, "I run this town." 2 board members whispered across the table, flipping through agenda packets. "We're moving fast now," Linda said to the room. "The paperwork's been served. He'll be out in 3 days." Becker said the city's not going to push back. A door creaked open. Officer Troy Becker slipped in, 20 minutes late. He looked disheveled, hair damp, shirt rumpled, eyes glassy with the haze of a long night. He tossed his phone onto the table, muttering something about traffic. Linda gave him a tight-lipped smile. "Did you get the final envelope dropped?" Becker nodded, dropping into his seat. "Hand delivered." Idiot signed it without blinking. The smugness in his voice curled around the room like smoke. And then, 3 sharp knocks at the door. Knock, knock, knock. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Just deliberate. Linda frowned. Did someone invite legal counsel? No one moved. The door opened without waiting for permission. A man stepped inside. No uniform. No fanfare. Plain clothes, pressed slacks, and a badge clipped to his belt. Tall. Still. The kind of man who didn't need to speak to be obeyed. Chief Randall Hale. The room stilled. You could hear the clock tick. His eyes swept across the faces, landing squarely on Linda. Then Becker. He didn't raise his voice. "My name is Chief Randall Hale, District 4. I'm here on an internal affairs-supported investigation into allegations of public corruption, code enforcement fraud, and unlawful seizure of private property." Linda blinked, slowly. I'm sorry, what is this?" He held up a leather case. "Warrant. Signed this morning. I suggest no one leaves." Becker sat up straighter, already fidgeting. "This is a closed board meeting. We have rights." Chief Hale didn't look at him. He reached into his folder and pulled out a familiar object. A manila envelope, slightly bent at the corner. "This was recorded on surveillance," he said, placing it down gently in the center of the table. "Same envelope used in a bribery transaction behind this building. Time-stamped. Audio confirmed. Cash contents marked." Linda's face turned the color of wet ash. "That envelope," she started, her voice suddenly tight. "You can't prove what was inside." Chief Hale raised an eyebrow. Becker opened his mouth but then spotted the label on the side of the envelope. It wasn't just a prop. It was evidence. The envelope still bore his fingerprint, smudged right where he'd clutched it with sweaty hands the night before. "You were recorded accepting a bribe to escalate fines and assist in the forced seizure of a property under false code claims," Chief Hale said. "Do you want to keep talking, or do you want to call counsel?" Silent. One board member pushed back from the table slowly, hands raised. "I didn't know anything about this. Chief Hale nodded. You'll have time to explain. We've already requested email and phone records for everyone present. A knock came again, this time from outside. Uniformed officers stepped in one by one. Calm. Linda finally stood, her voice shaking. You don't understand, this was just about neighborhood improvement. We were protecting property values. Chief Hale looked her dead in the eye. Is that what you call it when you steal homes from veterans and seniors? When you falsify fines? When you intimidate a man out of the house he built with his own hands? Her jaw locked. Becker tried to slide his phone off the table, but one of the officers caught it mid-reach. The room became a cage. Outside, birds still chirped. Lawns were still being mowed, but inside the HOA office, the tide had turned. The same envelope that had once carried corruption now sat glowing under the fluorescent lights, surrounded by silence, truth, and the cold weight of consequence. And Chief Hale? He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply nodded once toward the officers and said, "Let's begin." At HQ, the protagonist sat in a quiet interview room. No two-way glass. No bright light overhead. Just a chair, a legal pad, and a laptop. He didn't posture. Didn't tell them about the night Linda threatened him, or the early moments when he could have lashed out but didn't. He simply handed over his USB drive, neatly cataloged, labeled by date, cross-referenced with code violations. Everything's there, he said. Primary footage, backups, and transcripts. I reviewed it, eyes widening at the clarity of the video. The time-stamped footage, the audio, the meetings, they aligned with HOA vote logs and fine issuances. But the most damning evidence came from inside the HOA itself. One agent, skimming a pulled hard drive, found a folder on the HOA's own security server. Buried, but not deleted. Camera footage, internal meetings, hallway conversations, conversations recorded accidentally, ones they thought no one would ever hear. One clip showed Linda joking to Becker. Some of these folks are so scared of code numbers, they'll hand over their deeds for peanuts. Another caught a board member asking, "Do we even need a real city inspection before we condemn something?" They had hung themselves, with their own system. The resignations started quietly. Emails sent after midnight, phones shut off. By the end of the week, 4 of the 7 board members had stepped down. Officer Becker was placed on immediate suspension, pending criminal charges. His badge and weapon were quietly turned in. His cruiser was reassigned. Linda? She hadn't spoken publicly yet. Her lawyer released a statement blaming administrative mismanagement and claiming she had been misled by staff, but no one believed it. The neighborhood's online forum, once policed by the HOA's own moderators, was lit up with fury. Long silent residents posted their stories, photos of homes before and after, copies of checks they'd written, thinking it was just the rules. And in the middle of it all, the protagonist said nothing. He didn't post, didn't attend the emergency HOA meeting. He stayed home, cleaning his porch, repainting the trim. He didn't need the headlines. The truth had done its work, and the system that tried to bury him was collapsing under its own weight. The community center had never seen this many folding chairs. Rows packed wall to wall, residents clutching notepads, envelopes, coffee cups, some with arms crossed in quiet anger, others with eyes still wide in disbelief. Cameras from the local news station were already rolling. A journalist from the Tri-County Gazette leaned against the back wall, pen ready. This wasn't a normal HOA meeting. It was mandatory, ordered by the court as part of a temporary oversight measure. Linda Caraway entered through the side door, flanked by her attorney, face composed, hair perfectly pinned. She wore neutral beige, her trademark pearls absent. She offered tight nods, avoiding eye contact, as her lawyer adjusted a stack of folders and cleared his throat with importance. The room murmured. Several board members didn't even show. She stood behind the podium, fingers gripping its sides. As you know, recent events have caused confusion. Allegations have surfaced that, frankly, are being taken out of context. Officer Becker acted independently. The board was unaware of his overreach. A few heads shook. One elderly man let out a soft, bitter laugh. Before she could continue, the door opened again. The room went still. The protagonist stepped in, flanked by Chief Randall. Neither wore uniforms of authority. No badges on display. Just presence. He carried a tablet in hand, cords trailing from his jacket pocket to a small speaker set near the projector screen. Linda's eyes flicked to them. Then to her lawyer. He spoke up, voice clear. This footage has been verified by Internal Affairs and accepted into preliminary court filings. We'd like to show it now, for the record. The screen lit up. Black and white night vision. Linda and Becker. Alleyway. Envelope. Make sure he's out before the city reviews zoning changes. Push the fines, trash bin placement, noise complaints, whatever you can find. There were gasps. A woman in the second row covered her mouth. Another stood, trembling slightly. Then came the voice of Linda herself. From the HOA's own footage, unaware the system she installed was quietly auto-archiving. Some of these folks are so scared of code numbers they'll hand over their deeds for peanuts. That's when it happened. A quiet sob broke the silence. Everyone turned. It was Mrs. Holloway, 79. Her property had been seized the previous year after failing to repaint a shed during her cancer treatment. She held her son's hand, shoulders shaking. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew they were lying." The room cracked open, emotion rising not in rage, but release. Chief Randall turned off the video. No need to explain further. The journalist scribbled one line across his notebook, later published on the front page. HOA corruption exposed by new homeowner with police ties. Then, with eerie timing, as Linda tried to compose herself behind the podium, the HOA banner pinned to the wall behind her, faded blue with gold lettering, slipped from its mount and fluttered to the floor. No one moved to pick it up. The tree stood straight when they were done. A simple thing, not a monument, not a statement, just a living mark on land that was now, officially, irrevocably his. That night, as dusk settled, he sat on the porch, watching the wind shift through its few brave leaves. There were still cracks to fill in the foundation, paint to touch up, a roof that needed sealing, but this was home, and no board, no badge, no name on a letterhead would ever take it again. He didn't want fame. He wanted peace. And finally, he had it. Spring came in slow golden waves. The lawns were greening again, the dogwoods beginning to bloom. Children biked past his fence, and the street, once burdened with silence and suspicion, now carried laughter, conversations, and the occasional impromptu lemonade stand. The flyer arrived folded neatly in his mailbox, tucked between a garden catalog and an electric bill. Vote for your next HOA president. Community meeting, Thursday at 6. He unfolded it slowly, a quiet smile tugging at the edge of his mouth. The photo was simple. No suit, no staged lighting, just Mrs. Eleanor Briggs, his next-door neighbor. Retired schoolteacher, spent 35 years teaching 3rd grade, and still remembered every kid's birthday on the block. Below her picture was a handwritten slogan, "Let's bring kindness back to the rules." He didn't run, didn't speak at the meeting, but he did what mattered, repaired Eleanor's old printer when she needed flyers, offered to mow lawns for a few elderly neighbors who couldn't keep up with the new seasonal schedule, and quietly let a few respected residents know who he was voting for. Eleanor won by a landslide. Linda's house went up for sale a month later. The listing was sterile. No mention of community leadership, no open house. He walked past it one morning on his way to the corner store. The windows were bare, curtains pulled tight. A black for sale sign stood crooked in the yard, its edges fluttering in the breeze. No one had dared to face it, but the silence around that house was thick, like it knew it had become a monument to its own undoing. At home, he checked the mail. Tucked between tax forms and a letter from a contractor was a sealed envelope bearing the city crest. He opened it slowly, expecting bureaucracy. Instead, it held just one sheet, thick paper, embossed. On behalf of the City of Willow Heights, we extend our gratitude for your integrity and commitment to due process, civic accountability, and the restoration of trust in community governance. It wasn't flashy, no award, no plaque. But he read it twice. Then he walked inside, found an old picture frame in the back of a drawer, still dusty from the move, and slipped the letter inside. He didn't hang it in the living room, or near the door. He placed it on a quiet wall in his study, just above the shelf where the tree planting tools were now stored. Out of sight, but never out of meaning. That evening, he stood out front, watering the young oak tree. Its leaves had thickened, roots settling in. It looked like it belonged now. The neighborhood had changed, not by protest or parade, but by persistence, by showing up, documenting, standing ground, letting truth speak louder than threats. And sometimes, he thought as the hose hissed to a stop, that's all justice ever needs. A steady hand, a clear voice, and someone who won't back down. He looked out at the quiet street, then back at the tree, and with a faint smile, he whispered, "Sometimes, justice doesn't knock. It walks in, quiet, firm, and with a badge." Think your HOA drama is bad? This was just one street. Behind every mailbox and manicured lawn, there's a story someone tried to bury. And sometimes, it takes one calm voice to shake an entire system. Stick around, because the next door they knock on might be yours.